HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents When I Sing, Mountains Dance, a novel, by Irene Solà. Translated from the Catalan by Mara Fay Letham. Read by Joe Lewis. 1. Lightning. We arrived with full bellies, painfully full. Black bellies burdened with cold, dark water, lightning bolts, and thunderclaps. We came from the sea, and from other mountains, and from unthinkable places, and we'd seen unthinkable things. We scratched at the rock atop the peaks as if we bore salt to ensure not even weeds would sprout there. We chose the color of the hills and the fields, and the gleams in rivers, and the glints in upward glancing eyes. When the wild beasts caught sight of us, they cowered deep in their caves and crimped their necks, lifting their snouts to catch the scent of damp earth approaching. We covered them all like a blanket. The oak and the boxwood and the birch and the fir. Shh. And they all went silent, because we were a stern roof, and it was up to us to decide who would have the tranquility and joy of a dry soul. After our arrival, all was stillness and pressure, and we forced the thin air down to bedrock, then let loose the first thunderclap. Bang! A reprieve. And the coiled snails shuddered in their secluded homes, godless and without a prayer, knowing that if they didn't drown, they would emerge redeemed to breathe the dampness in. And then we poured water out in colossal drops like coins onto the earth, and the grass and the stones, and the mighty thunderclap resounded inside the chest cavity of every beast. And that was when the man said, "Damn and blast." He said it aloud, because when a man is alone, there's no need to think in silence. Damn and blast, you had to get yourself stuck in a storm. And we laughed, ha 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 ha, as we dampened his head, and our water slunk into his collar and slid down his shoulder and the small of his back. Our droplets were cold and made him cross. The man came from a house not far off, halfway up to the crest, by a river that must have been cold because it hid beneath the trees. There he'd left behind 2 cows, a bunch of pigs and hens, a dog and 2 roving cats, an old man, and a wife and 2 kids. Domenec was the man's name, and he had a lush mid-mountain garden patch and some poorly plowed fields beside the river. The patch was tended by the old man, his father, whose back was flat as a board. And Domenec plowed the fields. Domenec had come to reel off his verses over on this side of the mountain, to see what flavor and what sound they had, because when a man is alone, there's no need to whisper. That evening, when he checked on the herd, he found a fistful of early black chanterelles, and he carried the mushrooms wrapped in the belly of his shirt. The baby cried when he left the house, and his wife said, "Domenec," as if protesting, as if pleading, and Domenec went out anyway. It's hard to come up with verses and contemplate the virtue hidden inside all things when the kids are crying with the shrillness of a flayed piglet, making your heart race despite your best efforts to keep calm. And he wanted to go out and look at the cows. He had to go out and look at the cows. What did Sio know about cows? Nothing. The calf went ma, ma, desperately. Sio knew nothing about cows. And again he cried out, "Damn and blast," because we had snuck up quickly, hell yes, capricious and stealthy, and we'd trapped him. Damn and blast, because the calf's tail was stuck in a jumble of wires. The wires had gotten lodged between 2 trees, and what with all its straining, the calf's legs were shredded and gleamed bloody, ragged, and dirty. It went, "Ma, ma," trapped by its tail between the two trees, and its mother guarded it restlessly. Through the downpour, Domenec climbed over to the animal. His legs were good and strong from barreling up the mountain to get some air when the kids were yelling too much, or when they weighed too heavy on him, and the plowing weighed too heavy on him, and the old man's silence, and all the words, one after the other, from his wife, who was called Sio, and who was from Camprodon, and who had gotten herself into a fine fix, agreeing to go up there to that mountain-top with a man who slipped away and an old man who never spoke. And of course, sometimes Domenec loved her fiercely, still. But what a weight, for the everlasting love of God and Satan, how heavy that house could be. Folks should have more time to get to know each other before they marry. More time to live before making children. Sometimes he grabbed her by the waist and spun her around, round and round, like when they were courting. Because Sio, oh Sio, Lord have mercy, what a pair of legs. He dropped the chanterelles. The calf lowed. Domenec approached the animal, leading with his hands, slowly, step by step, saying things in a deep, quieting voice. "Shh, shh," he said. Its mother watched him warily. Domenec's hair was streaming wet. When he got home, he'd have Sio heat up some water to wash off the cold and the rain. He looked at the wire that cut into the calf's legs every time it moved. He grabbed its tail firmly, pulled out his knife, and deftly cut the knot. And then we let loose the second bolt, quick as a snake, angry, wide like a spider web. Lightning goes where it wants to, like water and landslides and little insects and magpies, transfixed by all things pretty and shiny. The knife was out of Domenec's pocket, and it gleamed like a treasure, like a precious stone, like a fistful of coins. The metal blade, polished mirror, reflected us back, like open arms, luring us closer. Lightning goes where it will, and the second bolt went into Domenec's head, deep, deep down, down to his heart. And everything he saw inside his eyes was black from the burn. The man collapsed onto the grass, and the meadow pressed its cheek to his. And all our giddy, happy waters moved into him through his shirt sleeves, beneath his belt, into his underwear and socks, searching for still, dry skin. He died, and the cow took off in a frenzy, and the calf followed after. The 4 women who'd witnessed it approached him, by degrees, because they weren't used to taking any interest in how people die, or in attractive men, or in ugly men for that matter, but the scene had been captivating, the light so bright and so dazzling that it sated all need for seeing. The knife had called to the lightning had hit the man's head. Bullseye. It had parted his hair right down the middle, and the cows had fled in a frenzy, like in some slapstick comedy. Someone should write a song about the man's hair and the lightning comb. Putting pearls in his hair, in the song, white like the gleam off the knife. And include something about his body, and his open lips, and his light eyes, like cups filling up with rain. About his face, so lovely on the outside, and so burned on the inside. And about the torrential water that fell onto his chest and rushed beneath his back, as if it wanted to carry him off. And about his hands, the song would tell, stumpy and thick and calloused, one open like a flower expecting a bee, the other gripping the knife like tree roots swallowing a rock. One of the women, the one named Margarida, touched his hand, partly to find out if the man was burning with the lightning bolt inside him, and partly just for the caress. Then the women left him be and gathered up the soaking wet black chanterelles he'd dropped, and abandoned the scene because they had many other things to do and many other things to think about. Then, as if their satisfaction were contagious, we stopped raining, sated, dispersed. And when it was clear we were done, the birds hopped onto the branches and sang the song of the survivors, their little stomachs filled with mosquitoes, yet bristling and furious with us. They had little to complain about, as we hadn't even hailed. We'd rained just enough to kill a man and a handful of snails. We'd barely knocked down any nests and hadn't flooded a single field. We retreated, dog-tired, and we looked upon our work. Leaves and branches dripped, and we headed off, vacant and slack, for elsewhere. One time we rained frogs, and another time we rained fish. But best of all is hail. Precious stones pummel towns, and skulls and tomatoes, round and frozen, covering terraced walls and paths with icy treasure. The frogs fell like a plague. The men and women ran, and the frogs, who were teensy-weensy, hid. Alas! The fish fell like a blessing on the men and women's heads, like slaps, and the people laughed and lifted the fish up in the air as if they wanted to give them back to us. But they didn't want to, and we wouldn't have wanted them back anyway. The frogs croaked inside our bellies. The fish stopped moving, but didn't die. But whatever. Best of all are the hailstorms. The names of the women. Eulalia did tell them how the great he-goat's anus was so soft, tender as a newborn's from how he coddled and kissed it, and how his shaft was cold as an icicle, and I laughed and laughed and laughed. And all that laughing, 'twere what got me hanged. 'Twas that laughter, like a heady venom inside me, like the witch milk from a spurge. 'Tis why I remember all the things. Because the laughter was white and contagious like tickles there inside my blood, and if you broke my arm, white milk would come out instead of red blood. And the laughter left me emptied. They could have saved themselves the trouble of the tortures and the rooms that stank of piss, could have saved those ropes that stretched out so long, and the wool rags full of ash, and they're waiting for me to stop laughing and confess. Confess what? Laughing was a good thing. 'Twas a cushion. 'Twas like eating a pear, like sticking your feet into a waterfall on a summer's day. I near would have stopped laughing for all the gold in the world, not for all the hurt in the world. The laughter unhitched me from the arms and legs and hands, what had been my loyal companions till then, and from the skin I'd covered and uncovered so many times, and it washed away the pain and grief over things that men can do to you. It done emptied me out like a dunderhead, all that he and ha, and my noggin went clong, with the whistling air that entered me and came out my nose and ears. The laughing left my little head clean as a walnut shell, fit to hold all the stories and all the things, what we said we done, and all the things they said we done against God and Jesus, and all the saints and the Virgin. What Virgin? A God like each of their fathers, evil, and a torturer like them, and frightened by all the lies they'd repeated so many times they'd done come to believe them. For there be not a single one left on these mountains, nary a one of those who did point at us, who locked us up, who searched for the devil's mark upon us, who knotted the nooses and tightened the ropes. because staying or not staying had nary a thing to do with the fires of hell, nor with divine punishment, nor with any faith, nor with any sorts of virtue. No. Being able to get up every morn to gather penny buns and golden chanterelles, and to make piss and tell stories, 'tis to do with the thunderclaps would befall that tree and that man. 'Tis to do with the infants born whole, and the infants what aren't, and the infants born whole, but with their innards not in the right places. Has to do with being the bird what the buzzard hunted, or the hare the dog hunted, or not. And the virgin and child and the demon 'twere all fashioned of the self-same folly. Of us all, 'tis Joanna the eldest. She did come from house nigh mine, Joanna did, and everyone did know she would make cures in a cauldron, and one day she bade me join her if I so desired to learn, and if I desired to go along with her at night, and to have her teach me how to cure fevers, and inflict the evil eye on goiters, and nursling maladies, and wounds and cattle diseases, and to find lost and stolen objects, and cast glances. Oh, such innocence! For ere our biggest sin against God, 'twas getting up every morn after they hanged us, and gathering flowers and eating blackberries. They all left Joanna be, and they all did call for her when they went into labor or suffered goiters. Until that time, when the hail fell heavy. Joanna kept a field of wheat, and when the hail raised all the other fields, nary a hailstone fell on hers. They did say 'twas Joanna had made the storm with some of her powders. Sorceress, they did yell. And then the son of her neighbor, who was called Little Juan, a 5-year-old lad who was just about the first to call her sorceress, fell ill, and his feet did swell purple and black, and he did expire 4 days later, and everyone did point at Joanna, and did exclaim that she had empoisoned his victuals. Get her! Get that old strumpet, that sorceress! And they did. And soon after that, little tiny frogs did rain down, and Joanna saith unto them, that if she so desired, she could bring on the hail, or bring down a rain of frogs, or make all the livestock die. And then they did take me also, and Joanna said nothing more ever again. But I was fine, for I learned to laugh. And then Eulalia did appear from Tregura de Dalt, and she did tell them how she had once gone to Andorra to unearth a dead baby and extract its lungs and liver, to make of it an unguent, to kill people and livestock. And then she did tell of how she bound men, so they could not lie with other women, but only with their wives. Since she made 6 knots on the strings of their undergarments, and then with every knot she did say, I bind you on behalf of God, St. Peter and St. Paul, and the whole heavenly court, and on behalf of Beelzebub and Dio and Cuxol, so that you cannot join carnally with any woman who be not your wife. And once she bound a man and a woman who were neighbors of hers, and who were cruel and threw rocks at her. She did bind them with hairs from their heads, so they couldn't copulate. And when the husband wasn't there, the woman couldn't live without him, and when he was there and wanted to come close to her, her entire body itched such as she thought she might die, and she couldn't stand to be near him. And that way 4 years passed. 4 years. Ha ha ha, hee hee. And then one day their son who took care of their goats brought the animals past Eulalia's land, and Eulalia did say, Oh, my bad wolves, devour your goats. And right then and there, a wolf pounced into his herd and killed a goat. Then they took Eulalia too, and when they had her, she dared tell them that one night the 4 of us had snatched a nursling from his mother's side and taken him to a field, and we had played with him as if he were a ball. Eulalia always did tell the best stories, still does, better than anyone. Stories that make me laugh, 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 until something loosens up inside of me, even deeper inside than the little drops of piss. She tells stories, and we were there in her stories, and verily what a joy it is to be there in them. Inside Eulalia is a little voice, deep, deep inside, what tells her tales. A little voice, the devil's voice, what told her about the misdeeds. And 'twas spurred on by the pain men inflicted upon her, and unleashed like a tongue what no longer knows how to lie still. The little voice came from deep inside her own head, like a font springing forth with images and words. We entered the forest, I upon a black she-ass, and Dulceta from Cancunil. 'Tis I exclaimed, upon a fox, and there was no moon, and the stars gave nary any light. And a branch leaped out into my path, verily, like a claw scratching my face, and I said, Jesus, and I fell from the she-ass, and Dulceta said, never say Jesus again. And I paid her mind. We did go to the Roca de la Mort. We did go there, with our armpits smeared with an unguent that scorches the hairs forevermore, and that is why our armpits are bare. When we were there at the rock, all of us, men and women, did mark a cross upon the ground, and we did lower our skirts, and we did each place our buttocks there upon the cross, for swearing faith in God. And then we did kiss the devil's anus, one by one. And sometimes he took the form of a calico cat, and sometimes of a he-goat, and he said unto us, Art thou with me, my child? And we all did answer, yes. And then we ate cheese and fruit and honey, and we drank wine. And we all joined hands, men, women, and demons. And we embraced, and we kissed, and we danced, and we fornicated, and we sang all together. Margarida cried. She cried and denied everything. She cried and cried at the injustice of it all, and sometimes she shrieked. And I told her, Come now, Margarida, don't cry. All four of us locked up there in the same dark cell that wasn't even a cell. That was for holding livestock. And we made a good pair, Margarida and I, because I just laughed and laughed, and she just cried and cried, and sometimes the more she cried, the more her face contorted, and the more snot and saliva dripped from her, with her face all red and all swollen and all ugly. The more I laughed, and the more I laughed, the more she cried. And I told her, Come now, Margarida, don't cry. And we made a good pair. Margarida denied every accusation, one after the other, and the only thing she would admit to was having set the table at night. Placing the tablecloth, and bread and wine and water and a mirror, so the evil spirits could gaze upon themselves while eating and drinking, and not kill her babies. But they only need one little thing to hang you anyway. When Eulalia told them that Joanna was the mastermind who did bring the ghosts, and did make the unguents we smeared ourselves with, and was the finest at making elixirs throughout the whole country, and all the other wicked things that witches do, and that she was the mistress of the he-goat of Biterna, and that we were all three her disciples, Joanna didn't even blink. Eulalia didn't say that with evil intent, nor did Joanna bear her any bitterness for it, when we were all done for she only done said it 'cause she ran at the mouth. Just as all the air burst forth from my mouth in ha-has and he-he's, and Margarida just cried and cried. All four of us there upon the self-same soiled hay, covered in rats and fleas. Joanna speaks not, she denies nothing, nor does she laugh, but she is still the leader, and still the sagest, and always finds the best strawberry tree fruit and the best mushrooms, and she's the one who knows the most about abetting births. And she is the first to piss when we find crosses in the mountains, and to grind her nether quarters thereupon. And she is the first to crap upon the tree where they did hang us. She makes nice, firm turds, and smiles like a mouse while she is squatting. And she is also the first to shit when we come across little chapels and hidden hermitages. The tales Eulalia tells aren't all about witches or about us. Sometimes the little voice tells her things about the mountains and the stones and the pools of water, and the birds sing her songs, and the fairies explain fables to her, and I follow her like a little girl, like a lapdog, like a newborn sheep follows its mother, ready to throw myself beneath a horse if need be, to get back amid her tales. Because she makes me laugh, that Eulalia does. Once upon a time there was a Christian king of Aragon who had 3 daughters as lovely as the sun, she tells me. Just as the king and queen began to think about marrying the princesses off, they came to realize all 3 of them had been courting, each princess paired with a Moorish infidel. I do so love tales about the Moors. Furious, the king locked up his 3 daughters in a very high tower so they could never again see their beloveds. But one night, the 3 princesses did bribe the guards with a fistful of gold coins and escaped the tower, and all 3, along with their Moorish lovers, did mount 3 horses and ride off into the Pyrenees, far from the Christian kings and the Moorish kings. On the 3rd day, the king went to visit his daughters to convince them to cease keeping company with infidels and to marry Christian princes. And when he reached their cell, he found they had fled, and then in anger he did exclaim, "May God's wrath fall upon them, wherever they may be." And all at once the weather shifted. A storm of ice and snow surprised the 6 fugitives on horseback, a storm so fierce that it brought the lovers into an embrace, and all 6 were frozen solid, unable to take another step. And there you have them, one behind the other, embracing their beloveds, the mountain ranges of the 3 sisters, covered in snow, says Eulalia, pointing to the mountains. Or she tells the tale of a water sprite captured by some townspeople, along with a white tablecloth they took from her. Poor thing. They locked her in a kitchen so she wouldn't escape. She was a small woman who sat all day on a bench looking out through the window without opening her mouth, as if she were mute or couldn't fathom human speech. But one evening, the mistress of the house where she was locked up began to make dinner, and lit the stove and put a pot of milk for soup on the coals. As the woman bustled out, the water sprite did swiftly shout, "Hurry, hurry! Your white milk boils over." And the wife rushed over to the pot, and in all the commotion the sprite leaped up from the bench and escaped out the door. And they say that right before disappearing forever, she spit out, "Ye shall never know what yellow dark root doth bestow." And she laughed the little laugh of a ferret. And still to this day, the people of those towns haven't any knowledge of the many properties of the thick yellow dark root. Margarida sometimes cries over Eulalia's tales. She cries because a father turned his daughters into mountains, or cries over the things they did to us, the wool and the ash and the red-hot irons and the chains and the bench and the weights on our feet and the red blood. She cries over her death like all things that die. And I tell her, "Come now, Margarida, don't cry." And sometimes she cries too, when a baby is born in the cave, and I tell her, "Come now, Margarida, don't cry." And after the storm, she did cry a little too, for that man, because he looked so handsome there in that clearing, she said. What a shame 'tis that men are so quickly consumed, and how other men cling to the empty bodies and hide them and bury them to avoid seeing what will also happen to them in time. And she did cry again when they came looking for him, and they carried him off, and he never did return to keep us company. Instead, they placed a cross there with a lightning.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?